Douglas Corrigan was an aviation pioneer in a time of aviation pioneers. He didn't have wealthy backers like contemporaries like Charles Lindbergh or Amelia Earhart. He couldn't command the attention that Howard Hughes could. But when Douglas Corrigan flew into history on July 17, 1938, by completing the first non-stop transatlantic solo flight from Brooklyn, New York to Dublin, Ireland, he had a unique claim to fame because he was supposed to land in California. Way Corrigan deserves to be remembered. Corrigan was born on January 22, 1907, in Galveston, Texas. His birth name was Clyde Corrigan, but he legally changed his name as an adult to Douglas. His family moved around during his childhood and ended up in Los Angeles, California. Corrigan dropped out of high school, worked in construction for a while. Reflecting on this time in life, Corrigan would later say, "I never had any aims. That's why I never got anywhere." But the directionless existence ended when at age 18 he took a $2.50 ride in a Curtiss JN4D Jenny on a sightseeing tour. After that, Corrigan saw his future in the skies. He began taking lessons every Sunday at an airfield owned by B.F. Mahoney and Claude Ryan. His first solo flight took place on March 25, 1926. Mahoney and Ryan hired Corrigan to work at Ryan Aeronautical Company in San Diego, and he was with the group that constructed the Spirit of St. Louis, the custom-built, single-engine, single-seat high-wing monoplane that was flown by Charles Lindbergh. Corrigan was responsible for installing the wing, an instrument panel, and gas tanks for the famous plane. Along with a colleague, he increased the plane's lift by creating a wing 10 feet longer than any previous Ryan aircraft. Corrigan met Lindbergh in 1927 and wasn't impressed. He said, "Gosh, he looks like a farmer. Do you suppose he can fly?" Corrigan and his co-workers celebrated when Lindbergh made history in the plane that they constructed. That event would cement in his mind that he wanted to do the same thing, complete a solo crossing of the Atlantic, except his destination would be Dublin instead of Paris, in order to celebrate his Irish-American heritage. When Ryan Aeronautical moved from San Diego to St. Louis, Corrigan decided to remain behind in California, where he became a mechanic for a flight school. He loved to go up and practice dangerous stunts over and over again, so much so that the owners of the school asked him to stop. They were afraid that he was being a bad role model for the students and that he would crash their airplane. Instead of acquiescing, he simply flew his stunts farther away from the airfield so that they wouldn't see him. In 1933, Corrigan purchased a Curtiss Robin for $310 and set about customizing it in order to make his dream of a transatlantic trip come true. He added additional gas tanks and a new engine, a Wright J65 with 165 horsepower. But a federal inspector, after examining Corrigan's plane, determined it was not safe for an intercontinental flight, though he was approved to fly across the United States. He continued to apply for permission to make his dream flight, and federal authorities continued to deny his application. In the meantime, Corrigan added even more gas tanks to his Curtiss Robin and dubbed the little plane Sunshine, because I'd always considered my plane as a little ray of sunshine. After Amelia Earhart's plane disappeared in 1937, Corrigan feared he would never receive permission to make his flight, as the government began demanding even more safety measures for pilots. They told Corrigan he must get a license to operate a radio, though Sunshine didn't even have a radio for him to use. When authorities refused to issue a flying license for his plane, Sunshine was grounded for 6 months. Corrigan made a few final adjustments to the plane, approximately $900 worth, or what would be around $16,000 today, and flight inspectors looked over the changes and gave him an experimental license. They also approved a flight plan for Corrigan to travel from Los Angeles to New York and back again in 1938. It was then that Corrigan seemed to take matters into his own hands. On the first part of the flight, from Long Beach to New York, one of the gas tanks in Corrigan's plane sprung a leak and gasoline sloshed around his feet. Some historians say he completed his first leg of the trip with his head hanging out the window in order to not become sick from the fumes. By the time he landed at Roosevelt Field, Corrigan estimated there were only 4 gallons of fuel left in his tanks. He examined his tanks and decided to risk the flight, as repairs would have taken him at least another week to complete. Corrigan made the short flight from Roosevelt Field to Floyd Bennett Field, where everyone had their attention on the famous Howard Hughes, who was preparing to take his infamous flight around the world, and very few paid attention to what Corrigan did next. On July 17th, Corrigan filled his tanks with 320 gallons of gasoline. He brought a compass, a map of the United States, 2 chocolate bars, a quart of water, and 2 boxes of fig bars. When he began his flight, Sunshine was so heavy that she traveled more than 3,000 feet down the runway before her wheels left the ground. 31-year-old Corrigan took off and disappeared into the fog, except that he was headed east as opposed to west, which his flight plan clearly indicated that he should. He had to crouch in the airplane because it was so crammed with fuel cells, and on the way, Sunshine sprung the gas leak again. This time, all he did was use a screwdriver to punch a hole in the floor so at least it wouldn't slosh around his feet but drain out while he was flying. To compensate, he increased his speed a little bit. Corrigan later said he saw a fishing boat and realized that he was going to live through the crossing and opened some of his meager rations to celebrate. Then he said, "I noticed some nice green hills." He landed Sunshine on July 18th at the Baldonnel Airport in Ireland. Corrigan hopped out of his plane and said to the surprised Irish airport workers, "Just in from New York. Where am I? I intended to fly to California." When he checked his gas tanks, he had 30 gallons left. In an interview with United Press, Corrigan said, "I don't feel very tired, but I sure was surprised when I found myself off the coast of Ireland." When a customs official and army officer met the pilot, he had an explanation ready. "I got mixed up in the clouds and I must have flown the wrong way." When he couldn't produce a passport, Irish officials called the American embassy. Though the customs agent at first considered arresting Corrigan, he ended up letting the pilot go, saying that this type of incident, a flight arriving with no entry papers, had never happened before and he wasn't sure what the proper protocol was. The American official from the embassy, John Clarence Cudahy, asked Corrigan to explain how he came to be so far off course. Corrigan replied that he must have misread his compass. The official replied, "It was hazy when you took off, was it? Well, your story seemed a little hazy too. Now come on and tell me the real story." To which Corrigan reportedly said, "That's my story, but I sure am ashamed of that navigation." While in Ireland, Corrigan met the Prime Minister of Ireland, Eamon de Valera, who was more amused than angry by the stunt. De Valera said he thought since Corrigan was able to come into the country without papers, he should be able to go home without them too, and he thanked the pilot for bringing the world's attention to Ireland. Corrigan made a side trip to England and met the American ambassador there as well, Joseph Kennedy. U.S. aviation officials required more than 600 words to list all the regulations Corrigan broke in a telegram. In response to his unauthorized flight, American authorities suspended Corrigan's license for 2 weeks. But it didn't matter because Sunshine wasn't flying back home. Officials booked Corrigan and his plane a ticket on the steamship Manhattan. He passed his 2-week suspension on the ship. Corrigan received a hero's welcome when the ship pulled into New York. Mayor LaGuardia congratulated him on his successful flight. The public was enchanted with Corrigan. Not only had he defied authorities to fulfill his dreams, but he invented a story to explain it and never backed down when confronted about its truth. His brazen flight was a welcome respite from the economic depression and the drums of war already beating in international reports. In his obituary, the New York Times explained the reason for his fame. He was an impish young pilot who had boldly thumbed his nose at authority and then baldly denied it. Also, anyone looking at the plane Corrigan used to make his flight marveled that he had made it so far in one piece. The American journalist H.R. Knickerbocker wrote of Corrigan's plane Sunshine, "His plane, a 9-year-old Curtiss Robin, was the most wretched-looking jalopy. As I looked at it, I really marveled that anyone should have been rash enough to even go in the air with it, much less try to fly the Atlantic. He built it, or rather rebuilt it, practically as a boy would build a scooter out of a soapbox and a pair of old roller skates." Corrigan defended Sunshine in later interviews, saying, "She's good enough to fly around the world. All the motor needs is a bit of grease." The newspaper, the Daily News, reported that Corrigan had pulled one of the grandest wild stunts of all time, and they labeled him a swell egg and an Irish adventurer of the old school. New York City had an estimated 1 million people turn out for Corrigan's ticker tape parade, even more than had showed up for Lindbergh's celebration. He banked on his celebrity to pen an autobiography entitled "That's My Story," and sold items that went the wrong way, like backward spinning watches. Hollywood came calling the next year, and Corrigan played himself in a biographical film about his transatlantic flight called The Flying Irishman. He was paid $75,000 for his role in the film, which was the equivalent of 30 years' salary as an airplane mechanic. When the U.S. entered World War II, Corrigan served his country as a test pilot and flew for the Air Transport Command. After the war, he participated in parades with other war heroes. He married and raised 3 sons, one of whom died tragically in a plane crash. Though his wife would die in 1966, Corrigan lived until 1995 in the ripe old age of 88. He maintained until his death that he accidentally flew to Ireland rather than California. Towards the end of his life, in 1988, John Corrigan was invited by organizers to a commemoration of the 50th anniversary of his now famous flight. Corrigan had become a semi-recluse after the death of his son, but he was tempted back into the public eye and even produced Sunshine, which he had disassembled and stored in a barn all those years. With just a little bit of effort, they were able to get her engine running again. People there said his eyes lit up so much when the engine started that the organizers felt it was necessary to put a guard on either side of the plane to make sure that there were no more accidental flights. Whether it was truly accidental or simply defying authorities, John Corrigan became one of the first few aviators to make a solo nonstop flight across the Atlantic Ocean, and he did so just because he loved to fly. And shouldn't we all be that lucky to discover our life's dream and to go make it happen and just not take no for an answer? I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.